All right, so let's talk a little bit boxing here because there's a few topics that I want to cover today. And I find it interesting that, Turkey Al-Sheikh is doing a great job when it comes down to giving us the fights that we want, in theory, of course. But he's doing he's doing what he can because right now, and especially these few years, we've had a hard time finding fighters who are willing to face one another because of all this undefeated bullshit record that unfortunately Fleming with Jr. started this, but it's kind of become a cancer. And you can't really blame Fleming with Jr. for having an undefeated record. It's just that it sold the undefeated record as showing that you are the best. Packy McFarland had an undefeated record, in the 1910s. Rocky Marciano had an undefeated record. Finito Lopez, Ricardo Lopez had an undefeated record. Joe Calzaghe had an undefeated record. Fleming with the Jr. and Andre Ward had an undefeated record. But Fleming with the Jr. marketed the undefeated record as something that shows that you are the best, and that's something that's totally false and not true. Now, like I said, Turkey came into the sport, and the sport was broken because many of the fighters who blame their managers and blame the promoters didn't want to take a lot of these fights. Okay. And the reason why they didn't want to take a lot of these fights is because they didn't think that they could beat their opponents. And they were afraid of losing their undefeated record because in their eyes, losing their undefeated record meant my career is over. Okay. And sad to say, but that is kind of true because if you think about it, a lot of the boxers today have this notion that if you lose a fight, your career is over. And when you look at, for example, Muay Thai, you look at UFC, you look at different contact sports, and you even go to the past of boxing, many of these fighters had records that were not that good. You could have 50 fights and have 9 losses, like Evander Holyfield, Thomas Hearns. You look at the past, and most of the fighters just didn't have an undefeated record, and there's a reason why. It's because if you face the best of the best and you don't duck, then you're going to lose. One of the reasons why Fleming with the Jr. had an undefeated record wasn't necessarily because, he wasn't a good technician. It's just because there were certain styles that he probably didn't want to face, like Keith Thurman. That was his mandatory. He didn't face Paul Williams. There were a few fights that he could have taken that I think would have kind of exposed his record more instead of just fighting flat-footed Latinos. Okay. Now, obviously, most people don't really want to talk about these topics because they're afraid of losing, their fans. They're afraid of losing support. They're afraid of losing, attention. And it also comes across as if it was racist, right? But the truth is that boxing is racism. And I hate to say that, but it's kind of true. Now, before the Mexican American crowd came or the Latinos came to the sport of boxing, there was already that AK Mexican style. The Canadians practiced it. Marcel Sill, the French did it. Jack Delane, Canadian boxer. There was Joe Gans, Terry McGovern. All these sort of boxers, they already practiced that style. It wasn't really something that was new, or there was nothing new about it. Jake LaMotta practiced that style. Johnny Greco practiced that style. Jack Sharkey practiced it. Tommy Givens practiced that style. Johnny Dundee practiced that style. Johnny Risco practiced that style. There were many fighters. Tony Zell practiced that style. He was a world champion as a middleweight. So that so-called Mexican style is kind of an invention and a lie because it never really existed. It was something that was already there And this was before Latinos had a real presence in the sport of boxing. Now, I hate to say this, but they came late to the show. Now you have, Manuel Ortiz, which is a great fighter, Mexican fighter. He was in the lower weight class. Was American fighter, really, not Mexican, but he was in the lower weight classes, and he did what he had to do in the sport. But being realistic, there wasn't too many great Latino boxers till later on in the 60s and moving forward, because like you had the Danny Lopez and you Bobby Chacon and all these great fighters that came afterwards. But partly was because there was a lot more competition in the beginning of the century, from the 1910s to the 1950s, because 1960s, because there was the people were hungry. It was post World War II. People were trying to look for food or places to work, and boxing was just a good sport to start making money, and making money fast. The problem is that, unfortunately, it was kind of hijacked by the Latinos afterwards, okay? And they try to make their sport theirs, as if they were the ones who had a presence in the sport, and that's absolutely false and not true. Now, to be honest with you, I can't really blame a lot of people for thinking this way, because just like Turki Al-Sheikh, he doesn't have a understanding of the sport of boxing. So for him to look at certain things and be like, well, they're are Tom and Jerry fights, right? He doesn't really know what he's talking about. He doesn't really understand what this means. All that he knows is that commercially, in a commercial way, in his eyes and the way that he looks at the sport of boxing, he cannot comprehend that styles make fights, because he's new to the sport. Now, frankly, I can't really, like I said, I can't really blame him for it, because he came here with the idea to kind of commercialize his country in a way that it would include boxing. But he could have really done it with any other sport. So it's not his fault that he doesn't understand boxing history. But if you don't understand boxing history, you're not going to really understand the sport, because before there was a Latino community, there was the whole world practicing this at the same time, in a much more competitive era when we had the National Boxing Association. Now, clinching was invented by white people. People accuse black fighters for using the clinch. But the reality is that this was actually invented by the rules of white people. Before the National Boxing Association, 1921, if you look at the rules, a lot of the boxers could do clinching, because before clinching, and during bare knuckle times, people were allowed to use clinching. And in fact, if you look at most of the historical fights, most of them fought using the clinch as part of their inside game. But today, they don't use the inside game like they used to in the past, because using clinching is anathema for most people who don't understand the sport of boxing. If you look at the Queensberry rules back in the beginning of the 19th and 18th century, it was clear that clinching was legal. And the reason why you used it is for a weapon. And the reason why they use clinching is also for a defensive mechanism, so you wouldn't get as hurt. So way before there were Latino fighters. In fact, one of the first Latino fighters, Daniel Mendoza, who fought literally in the 17th century, right? He was of Jewish descent, and he was actually one of the smart fighters who invented different methods to beat other opponents. Okay, people don't recognize him, but he was actually pretty famous in boxing history. Now, once again, when you look at the boxers in the beginning of the century, from Gene Toney to Tommy Givens to Tommy Logram to Johnny Risco, Jimmy Slattery, you look at all these fighters who actually were white fighters, they all used clinching. And in fact, some of those fights, you watch like the Just Willer fight or Jim Jeffries fight, they all literally used the clinch. And it was part of what boxing would eventually become. Now, there was some adaptation later on. They used the jab, then they used to throw more hooks. Then they started to develop more of the jab. That's when Jack Blackburn started to kind of incorporate new systems. And there were other trainers who eventually started to manage the system. And, Stillman's gym came into the scene, and, there was just an adaptation of boxing. But for the most part, boxing was literally the clinch. There was nobody complaining where Benny Leonard was actually boxing backwards because he had feather feet. Nobody was saying, oh, you're running. And this was way before the Latinos came into the scene. Many of the black boxers who adapted this style of fighting, they adapted it, many of them, from white trainers. And they were smart to use this system because eventually that would actually help them develop new skills. Percy Bassett, Sugar Ray Robinson. So many good fighters developed this style of boxing. You had your, straightforward boxers, your swarmers. You had Harry Graves, and of course you had Henry Armstrong, who was a huge pressure fighter who knew actually how to cut a ring, and I'll get to that in a second. But for the most part, many of the great black boxers who came in the beginning of the century in the United States developed the arts of boxing from white trainers. And they moved forward. It wasn't a big deal. If you look at fights from Freddie Dawson, he was a great clincher. And so was Fritzy Civic, who was a dirty fighter. Battling Battleino, he used the clinch. He literally used the bull clinch the whole time to get you out of your rhythm and then fight you. That's what he did. That was his strategy, and it worked. But nobody was accusing Battling Battleino for using that style of boxing. Why? Because it was part of the sport of boxing. And the problem is that Latinos came late to the scene. They weren't the first ones. The French, Canadians, Americans, British, and all these different countries that came afterwards were the first ones to start the sport of boxing. And there were champions before there were Latinos in the sport of boxing. The sport of boxing does not need, and I hate to say this because it sounds bad, but it really doesn't need Latinos. It just needs poor people who are willing to make money and pick a sport that's going to make him quick money. And that's always been boxing. That's why Henry Armstrong, at a young age, decided to leave the railroads and start boxing. It was the same for Joe Louis. It was the same for Tony Zell. It was the same for all the boxers who started during that time before the Great Depression. Because they wanted to eat. But it was a quick way to make money instead of working in a factory or, doing some sort of labor job that, that didn't pay much, and it was repetitive and there was no access to making too money, right? Kid Chocolate made his first paycheck. What was it, $70,000? Like, wow, that was a lot of money back then. But he was a great fighter. Panama All Brown. Once again, these are all Latino fighters. Kid Chocolate, from Cuba. Panama All Brown from Panama. They were all in the sport of boxing because it was quick money and they could develop forward. but there was no Mexican Americans. There was Mexican fighters, but not too many Mexican Americans. So I find it ironic, and this is for Turki Al-Sheikh, that you're trying to change a sport that is being already in use for more than 150 years. And you're trying to change the mechanism of it because a few casual fans don't like a certain style. Now let's put it this way. Casual fans will never understand the sport of boxing. And the reason why is because they're casuals. A casual boxing fan are the same that complain about watching a soccer game or watching for the first time a hockey game or watching for the first time a basketball game. They're casuals. They don't have any loyalty to any sport. But the sport of boxing is retained with us that are the purest and love boxing. For us who done sparring, for us who done different things, read history, go to different gyms. That loyalty is with us. Now, the problem is that Turkey has it all wrong. You don't go there and try to submit the sport of boxing to what Latinos tell you to do. You don't do that. You go through what is historic. Because it's not the style of fighting that's going to make the difference. It's not. Let me give you an example of this. If the style is what makes you money, how can Gary Antoine Russell, who is a come forward fighter many of the time, he likes to swing and go there and just pressure you and destroy you, makes less money than Devin Haney or Canelo Alvarez when he's just as exciting or more, right? How is David Benavidez, who is a come forward fighter, who Canelo Alvarez is openly ducking? I mean, the dude is openly ducking David Benavidez. How is David Benavidez making less money than Canelo Alvarez? You want another example? Sure, let's go. How is Subriel Matias, a boxer who's literally one-dimensional, goes in and puts all the pressure in the world to make it a fan-friendly fight? Why is his paycheck lower than Ryan Garcia? Or lower than Devin Haney's? Why? Why is it lower than Shakur Stevenson's? You see? People don't want to talk about that. Because in the end of the day, it's not about your style. If this was the case, Royman Villa, who's a Colombian brawler who came to the United States and fought against Jernenes, would have made $1 million because every single Latino, every single person would have actually watched Romain Villa because he is a straightforward fighter, just like Gary Antoine Russell, just like Dave Morrell Jr., just like all these fighters. So how come these forward fighters that like to pressure, who make it an entertaining fight, are not making more money than Canelo Alvarez? Because in an equal world where their styles is what matters, these fighters would technically make just as much money as Canelo Alvarez. Right? How come Arthur Beterbiev, who's a straightforward fighter, pressure fighter, smart fighter actually, makes less money, even though he gives entertaining fights, than Devin Haney? Or Floyd Mayweather Jr., right? You complain about Floyd Mayweather Jr. style of boxing, but he's making less money. Why? Because you're saying that these are boring fights and that the casuals are gonna buy these pay-per-views if it's not boring. But for the sake of Jesus Christ, what the fuck are you talking about? Arthur Beterbiev does not make the paycheck that Canelo makes. And he fights more forward than he does. He's earned his stripes. Just like, well, Canelo, I don't like him. I mean, he's never ducked anybody. Canelo's ducked like 3 fighters. He dug Demetrius Andre at 154, 160. Didn't want to be undisputed. He puts rehydration clauses. He does all these things. But Arthur Beterbiev makes less money. Arthur Beterbiev doesn't put any. He doesn't try to shake down any boxer, putting, any sort of advantage over them, right? But he makes less money. So is it really that the styles make more money? Because most boxers actually are brawlers, and Pitbull Cruz does not make more fucking money than Shakur Stevens. So that is a totally false statement. And that's the wrong way to look at boxing, Turki Al-Sheikh. You're not understanding what boxing is really about. Clinching more or clinching less is not going to make more or less money. It never did in the old days. It never made a difference when Jack Johnson was fighting Jess Willard or Jim Jeffries. It didn't make a difference when Tiger Flowers fought Harry Greb or any of the top opponents. Harry Greb used the clinch all the time. He was a great middleweight. It didn't make a difference, Mr. Turkey. It didn't make a difference that Benny Leonard was literally running like these, Latino people say. Which, like I said, they're new in the sport. They were new in the sport from the 60s moving up. Literally, that's when you started seeing more, because there was less boxers who started making more money. I mean, people who came out after the 50s, they didn't have to box. So therefore, they had normal lives. You had the 50s boom. Why box? Why get a CTE in your head, right? When you can just go to university and, the economy's booming and you can have your own home and kids and, it's a brutal sport. You didn't see as many Irish. You didn't see the Mike Mateigs fighting. René DeVos, the boxers who came from Belgium. You didn't see those sort of boxers anymore. And there were a lot of great Belgian fighters. You didn't see the Ray Famichons from France coming anymore. Marcel Cerdan, he wasn't showing up anymore. Because with a better economy, the whole world started to slow down on their boxing. And thereafter, it slowed down. There weren't too many Mexican champions. In fact, there was only one, and that was really, to be honest with you, it was Juan Zurita. He had the National Boxing Association. Baby Arismendi only had the New York State Athletic Commission championship, which was a state championship. Wasn't even the real deal. Freddie Miller was the red champion in his weight class. And then Battling Shaw, he had a title that was literally, I think, from Louisiana. That wasn't a real title. That was sanctioned by Louisiana, but that was in the National Boxing Association. So the real champion during all that time was Juan Zurita. And there's nothing wrong with that. That was a great championship. But after that, the whole world started to go down in boxing because the money, they didn't need the money. They didn't need to go through that torture of fighting 120 fights. But nobody in the old days was fucking crying about, oh my god, they're hugging. And this bullshit came from the newer fans later on who have no idea about boxing. And do you know who started this bullshit? The Filipinos. They started this garbage. Nobody in the 90s was calling Pernell Whitaker a runner. Nobody called Oscar De La Hoya fighting Tito Trinidad a runner. Tommy Hearns wasn't called a runner because, he tried to fight backwards against Marvin Hagler. Or huggers, or except the Latinos. They actually did. Why? Because they were limited where they're boxing. And they think that boxing is a fucking street fight. It's 2K people throwing punches like retards at one another. I'm gonna hit you. That's what they think boxing is. And these are the casual fans. And boxing has to submit its identity to retards? You know what I'm saying? Turkey. Do you know what really sells in boxing? Let me tell you the truth. Because I'm a real channel here. Probably the realest you'll ever see. Because nobody's going to say what I say. Nobody has the balls. You know what sells? It's not the styles. I just prove it to you. That's not true. And I can debate you about it. I can debate anybody about it. It's racism and nationalism. That is what sells a fucking fight. And it's always been this way. What was the greatest fight back in the old days? Iron Age. Terry McGovern versus Joe Gons. Black fighter fighting a white fighter. Whoa. It wasn't their styles. They literally clinched the entire fight. They literally clinched the entire fight. Nobody cared. Because there was no Latinos. They didn't cry. They were little crybabies. Jack Johnson versus Jim Jeffries. I mean, he didn't want the fight, but he took the fight. And at the end of the day, it was a black fighter versus a white fighter. That's what sold. That's really what sold. But the media will not fucking tell you what I'm telling you because they're not real, Turkey. I'm real in that regard. What sold? What fight sold the most with Joe Louis? Y'all know, if you know something about boxing history, it was Max Schmeling. When he went to Germany and when he went to the United States. It was racial and nationalistic. The Germans wanted their fighter to win. And the Americans, who never treated Joe Louis right, shameful. The IRS was on his ass, even though he was helping other people. And he was half Native American, which is in my blood. Just like Henry Armstrong. And many black folks actually have Native American. He was mistreated by his own country, Turkey. But when he fought Max Schmeling, suddenly everybody cheered for him. That was probably the greatest fight in history. So many people tuned in because it was Nazi Germany, the evil Nazis, right? Versus the Americans. And now Joe Louis is representing our nation. And despite all the hate he got, just like Devin Haney gets hate, Just like Jack Johnson got fucking hated, just like the Black Murderers Row. You know anything about them? Bear Liddell, Elmer Ray, the heavyweight, Holman Williams, Coco Kid. Debate about him being Puerto Rican. I think he was American mother, nationalized as American. But anyway, whatever. Many of them were discriminated. They were talked bad about because they were too fucking good. So this Devin Haney shit did not stop with the fucking Latinos, and we'll get that in a second. That was way before that. Because it was racial, Mr. Turkey. It was racial. When Tommy Farr, Don Coquel, and other fighters who were British came to America, it was nationalistic. We were better than them. They were better than us. That's how it's always been. It wasn't about the fucking style of the boxer. Because they had boring styles then too. But legal. But people want to forget and erase the past, which is a reason why ESPN kind of eliminated ESPN Classics. You thought about that? Why don't they show ESPN Classics anymore? Because they don't want you to remind the history of boxing. If you love the sport of boxing, you love every single style. You might not necessarily want to train a certain style. I definitely don't want to be a flamethrower or a stone thrower, like many of these Latinos throwing rocks at each other. But there's the Angela Leos, who fight really well. Technical boxer from New Mexico. You have boxers as well, like Real Murataya. I hope he actually doesn't duck Andy Cruz. Hopefully he'll take the fight. And there's other boxers who, like Bam Rodriguez, who are actually boxing nice. And even David Benavidez boxes nice. It's his dad that actually talks about Tom and Jerry's, but he's a mediocre trainer. But David Benavidez doesn't necessarily say that because he understands. But many of the great boxers of the past had styles like Willie Pep. I mean, Willie Pep. What, are we going to call him a runner now? We're going to call Tony Canzoneri a runner? Doesn't make sense. But this came from the Filipinos because when Manny Pacquiao came into the scene, they literally had erased their history of boxing because they didn't really have a lot of good boxers since Pancho Villa, Midget Wolgast, who fought Smile Montana, who was a great fighter, Smile Montana. You look at the old Filipino fighters and you realize they could actually box. You'd be surprised how good they were. Midget Wolgast is a great flyweight. But the Tommy Guns, Small Dados, and all these different Filipino boxers, Flash Lord, they all disappeared, but they all actually could box. So now the new brand of Filipinos is just as flat-footed and come forward as the Mexicans. Same style. This is the same shit. Look at Argentinian boxers. They have the same style as Mexicans. What do we call it? Argentinian style now? I mean, they had some good fighters back in Argentina back in the day. Carlos Monzon, Eduardo Lauz, right? They got some good fighters. He was a power puncher, but he was good. Antonio Diaz, if I'm not mistaken, he was from Argentina too. They have this other boxer who actually moved this, head a lot. What was his name? I'm talking about, but he had great head movement. He never fought in America though, but he was good in his head. Nobody called him boring. But you know who I'm talking about. It popped in my head, man. It's too much history. But nobody really complained. So the Filipinos, the Mexicans, and the Latinos in general, except for the Cubans and the Dominicans, who are starting to see a different, form of boxing. Cubans always box nice though. literally they fight the same way. But I don't call it the Argentinian style, or I don't call it the Australian style. Australians, also fought like that. Jack Carroll was a boxer that moved forward a lot. He could box too, but he could fight forward too. Dave Sands. They were there already. There was no need for no Mexican Americans talking about running, or Filipinos, because they don't even know their own fucking boxing. But the Filipino fans had so much envy from Floyd Mayweather Jr., and they were so racist too. Even though they get the opportunity to fight in America thanks to Manny Pacquiao, we gave them the opportunity to fight in the United States, because no American is going to travel to the Philippines and fucking fight in that corrupt country. That's the truth. Ain't nobody going to do that. So we gave them the opportunity. And they disrespected our boxers. Now, obviously, I don't like necessarily Floyd Mayweather Jr., because, I don't like the fact that he was ducking certain fights, but his style was perfectly fine. There was nothing wrong with his style. But the Filipinos cried about it. He's a hugger, he's running, because he got outmatched by Floyd Mayweather Jr., who just by using his jab showed him how to box. Our American style succeeded. That's why we have over 500 champions, and Mexico is close to 200. And yeah, if you're saying the Latino champions is about 45 or maybe 46 now in America. But most of them, they're American, so it doesn't really matter. But we don't want to talk about that. It was the Filipinos who started this shit, Mr. Turkey. And that started with Floyd Mayweather Jr. Sadly, but it's true. They were racist. I mean, you look at the forums with the Filipinos, man, they were going ape shit. And many people were following them, which shows the racism in America too, which is sad. That the Filipinos started this. And then the Latinos started to adapt that sort of boxing to their vocabulary, forgetting the roots of boxing. But Mexicans used to have really nice fighters like Miguel Cantó. He was really good. Great technical fighter. Salvador Sanchez. They got some really good fighters. Benito Lopez was beautiful to watch. But then they just became stone throwers. Low IQ boxers. The Pitbull Cruz. And sure, they can, beat a certain fighter at a certain time. The United States men's national team in soccer could possibly beat Brazil in one game. It could happen. But it's not going to be the world champions. They're not going to be no world champions. If they face all the teams, they'll probably get smashed by all the teams. Same with the Mexican national team in soccer. They will get smashed. They might beat, Brazil one day or Argentina in one match. They gave it everything they have, and the Argentinians are like, holy shit, these people gave everything they have, and then they face Brazil and they get destroyed. Sure. But they're not dominating. And then they duck too. Because they see the American style of boxing and they're like, I cannot beat this style. And that's the problem, Mr. Turkey. They don't want to lose. You see? They don't want to lose. Because when they see the skill set of our American fighters, they're overwhelmed. They've never practiced the clinch in their gym. Somebody's fighting backwards, and now you got to move forward. They can try to cut the ring, but they don't know how to take away that jab. And when they get clinched, they don't have an inside game with their clinch. They don't know how to hit while they're getting clinched. So every clinch looks defensive. Why? Because they don't know how to break it. But you look at the old school, the bull clinching that was done during the old school days, and you see a completely different ballgame. Fred Apostoli. They all knew how to clinch very well and knew how to hit you inside too. Great middleweight, Fred Apostoli. But they don't do that anymore. because the art of boxing has disappeared. And sad to say, low IQ boxing is what's trying to rule the sport, Mr. Turkey. But it's all not based upon their styles in the end, because you can put Devin Haney right now against Ryan Garcia, and it will sell a shitload of pay-per-views. Why? Black versus white. And he's supposed to be Latino, but he's not really Mexican. He's really an American. Black versus white. Cepeda fought Shakur Stevenson, if it sold a lot. They're not white, they sell more. But to be honest with you, why was that everybody was talking about this fight? What were they talking about? Because it was Latino versus black. That's what sold in the end. Because Gary Antoine Russell can fight anybody, and he's not gonna sell, but he's a great come forward fighter, exciting as shit. He don't sell. And David versus Demetrius Andrade, which is another very underrated fight, to me, very historical fight for the fact that Demetrius Andrade being one of the most avoided boxers since the Black Murderers Row. Just totally avoided by the Latino community, many of them, because they don't want to give credit to black boxers. I'm just being honest. They want to put them down, saying they're not good enough. And it's not just Latinos. I mean, Gennady Golovkin, the fans, a lot of, racist fans that come from like Eastern Europe and all these countries trying to put down, Demetrius Andrade, which is an American fighter. And ain't that funny how Demetrius Andrade is representing the United States, and people in America would rather cheer for Triple G and Canelo Alvarez over their own? Sad, but true. I saw it firsthand when Andre Ward fought against Sergey Kovalev. Literally everybody, except for black people, were cheering for Sergey Kovalev because it's racist. People don't want to admit it because they're racist. America is a racist country. Whether you want to admit it or not, that's the truth. And that's been the history of it. And racists themselves. So don't worry about the styles, Mr. Turkey. Don't worry about that. Do not worry about the styles, because it doesn't even matter the styles. What matters is black versus white, black versus Latino, Latino versus white. Why do a lot of people want to put down David Benavidez against Canelo Alvarez, even though he wants that fight? Oh, he's begging for it. It's because some Latinos, they think they're white. And they want Canelo Alvarez. Because that's what they aspire to be. A nice, white-looking boy that speaks Spanish. And Canelo was smart to speak English because that actually helped him. When they see David Benavidez, Diego Pacheco, who are American-bred fighters, yeah, all right. Wow. We fucked up, wouldn't we? Diego Pacheco gets no attention. David Benavidez literally doesn't get as much attention as Canelo. They made Canelo like a huge monster. And he gives you so many good fights. But yet Ryan Garcia and Canelo are making the real dough. Because they're white. That's what people aspire to be. They want to be white. And I know that from my family history. Sad to say, but that's the truth. I have native roots. But some of my family members, they wanted to call their kids some crazy ass names that had nothing to do with where we really come from. And it's the same that I see with blacks too. I've seen it with Asians. It's the cream of the crop. You gotta be white. Now here's the point. and this is for Mexican Americans. Why are you waving? I mean, this blows my mind. First of all, and just gonna make sure of something. Mexicans from Mexico don't actually consider the Mexicans in America, which are not Mexicans, Mexicans. So just to take that off the way, real Mexicans from Mexico, they see Mexicans in America like gringos, and they have a completely different personality. The Mexican Americans are, I hate to say that, but more low class. I mean, I'm just being honest, okay? Americans in general are low class and compared with other nations, to let you know. But Mexican Americans definitely low class in compared to Mexicans. Real Mexicans are a different sort of people. Of course, they're going to cheer for their country, and they should. It's Mexico. But Mexican Americans, you waving your flag, the Mexican flag, even though you never born in Mexico? What are you, fucking nuts? I understand if it's like a traditional thing, you have a culture thing, and you want to. I believe the Irish do that, right? And Italian Americans do that. They're not really Italian; they're all Americans, and they're not Irish. They're really just Americans. But you want to give some recognition to where you came from. No problem with that. That's okay. But every time a fighter who's Latino from America fights, you wave your flag, even though you're not really Mexican, bro. Not even the Mexicans believe you're a Mexican. And when an American fighter fights, so let's say Shakur Stevenson fights against William Cepeda, who is actually real Mexican, you cheer for somebody who's not from your country? You're a piece of shit. Piece of garbage. I would never, if I was born in Mexico, I would never wear, or if I was there, I would wear proudly the Mexican flag. I would never put the American flag because I don't know that country. I wasn't born there. I don't know their culture. But you wave a flag that is not even yours. And you think that people, I mean, you look stupid as fuck, to be honest with you. Because in the end of the day, you are an American. You're not Mexican. If you're born in Los Angeles, if you're born in Texas, you are a fucking Yankee, bro. You are a gringo. That's what it is. And if you go to any other country, even your hometown in Mexico, you're still going to act like an American. Whether you want it or not, you are an American. But the fact that you choose to wave a flag that's not even representing your country, and the fact that you're even cheering for fighters who are not even from your country, only shows that you're a racist. Because if Demetrius Andrade is fighting, I don't give a fuck if my ancestry comes from Adam and Eve. I'm not going to cheer for the Middle East. I'm going to cheer for Demetrius Andrade because he's an American-bred fighter. And that's the boxing that represents me. That's who I'm going to represent. That's it. Now, if he loses or wins, and if he actually ducks or does something around that side, I'm going to criticize him. But even though Canelo ducks, you are cheering for Canelo? You're a piece of shit. You're a piece of garbage. You're disgusting, bro. And nobody should have empathy for you if that's what your mantra is, bro. That's terrible. You cheer for your country. That's where you're from. If no, go back to Mexico. I would never wave the American flag if I was born there and put American Mexican. Like, hey, fuck no, I'm Mexican. You have no loyalty. Makes sense. But racism is what really sells. And the truth is that black fighters have been historically the best fighters. American black fighters have been historically the best fighters. And it's a really beautiful thing to it's just beautiful to watch. These fighters just move, just the technique, which has been passed through generations. This is all this technique and all this styles It was something that was learned. These are really hard things to do, to wob, to move, to do certain angles. These are really hard things to do. That's not an easy thing to learn, Mr. Turkey. That's really rough. The easy thing is to go forward like a fucking monkey and just throw fucking shots with no direction, like a drunk sailor. That's easy, but the consequences of that are terrible. You can get brain injured. You can get in a lot of shit, Mr. Turkey. But racism is what sells. Now, I recommend you one thing, Mr. Turkey. You should learn more about boxing history before the Latinos came later on, and you'll recognize that that style was always there. There was no Mexican style. That's a commercial bullshit. The Canadians had that way before, and the French had that way before. And as Americans, we had that way before they were even part of the scene. We had it already. And what does Mexican boxing mean anymore? What does that even style mean anymore? Brawling? That's what you call it? Just two people without brains or IQs just throwing punches and bunches? What's the difference between that and hitting your head against a fucking wall? That might be more exciting. But here's the problem, Turkey, and this is another thing that I'm going to tell you. Why don't you go and sponsor bare knuckle fighting? Right? I mean, you want to see savagery, right? You want to see two Toms fighting there, not with steroids, like, like Reynoso, which, puts his he injects him with steroids to make a Tom and Tom fight. Why don't you put more money in bare knuckle fighting? Because if you put more money in bare knuckle fighting, you're going to see really exciting fight with really devastating consequences. And it's really funny because the British have bare knuckle. We in America had started to have bare knuckle sanctioned by different states, which was illegal back in the day. But now we're starting to have it. Go propose that style in Mexico. Show them how tough they are. Go to the Latin American countries. I fucking guarantee you, Mr. Turkey, that after a decade of bare knuckle, or at least a couple decades, the consequences of brain damage are going to be so fucking severe, like it was in the 17th century and 18th century, because it was mostly bare knuckle with the Fitzsimmons and all these sort of boxers that came back in the day, that you will eventually go back to defensive clinching and fighting. People will start to appreciate defense. All these simians, after they come up with some brain damage, these casuals who don't care about the sport, they will see what bare knuckle is really about. And I'm telling you, that is not a nice thing to say. I've seen a competition in New Mexico bare knuckle, and I'm telling you right now, that is some savagery right there. I mean, the broken jaw split in two. I mean, the noses, twisted noses. I don't enjoy that at all. I don't enjoy anybody receiving that sort of punching. I mean, that's terrible. But if you really want to see savagery, Mr. Turkey, yeah, go ahead and watch that. Put money on bare knuckle. Because I guarantee you, not even the tough brawlers who accuse other fighters like Devin Haney, not even the tough fucking brawlers will actually go and do bare knuckle. Because when they see that sport, their pussy starts to leak. They don't have the balls anymore because they see the consequences and the damage, and they don't want to be part of that. But you thought you were a real man. Come on. Come on. Come on. Yeah, do it without gloves. Bare knuckle style. Let's see if you, come on. See, you don't do it. Because we do it more in America, and we do it a lot more in, they do it in England too. In Canada, I think it's sanctioned. I'm not mistaken. I have to check on that. But they use a lot more bare knuckle than in these Latino countries. So what's wrong with the Latino countries? They can't do bare knuckle, but they're blaming Devin Haney for fighting backwards in boxing, which is actually okay. You want to take points? You don't think it's manly enough? So why don't you fucking do bare knuckle? Why don't you go in a street fight and do bare knuckle? because you're a fucking pussy and you're not gonna do it because you're a wimp. That's the truth. And listen, I give credit where credit is due. Bare knuckle is a tougher sport. Like Muay Thai is a tougher sport than boxing. I'm not saying boxing is not tough. Of course it is. But if you want to see blood and you want to see some serious brain damage, we don't have the balls that they do. I mean, it's just I just like boxing. I'm not, that's what I like to do. But I don't want to see anything that reflects anything that represents or at least is like bare knuckle and Muay Thai, because that's some severe shit right there. That's some real damage over there. I'm okay with my sport, but don't fucking change my sport. Don't change the clinch after 100 years of boxing. Don't change the clinch. Don't start to change the rules of the sport. What the fuck? Because Mexican Americans, they want it. They can't. Or the Filipinos. Well, fuck them. They don't have to join us. We can make our own national competition in the United States, and we can exclude the rest of the planet, and we will be fucking perfectly fine. We don't need them. We don't need the IBA. We don't need it. We have Golden Gloves. That's way better. We can get our talents from the best cities in America, and we don't need the rest of the fucking planet. If they want to change the sport, they can do it in their own fucking competitions. They can compete in somewhere else. If the American wants to see just Mexican boxing, they can just watch a pay-per-view of their national sport over there and stop pretending to be Mexicans and actually go there and live there. But they're going to do that. Because in the end of the day, the standard of boxing will always be the United States. Will they want it or not? Whether Latinos want to change it or they don't want to change it, we will always be the standard, the top of the echelon in boxing. And we will always incorporate the most champions, undisputed champs. We have 160 undisputed champs in the United States. And Japan, I think, has like 9, and Mexico has like, I think, 7 or possibly 8 now. Are you fucking kidding me? If we have to abide by their rules, get out of here. Get out of here. Fuck that. We don't have to abide by nobody's rules. We don't need them. They come to United States and play in our backyard, and they want to change our rules? Are you insane? No. And I want to tell you something that's very important too, Mr. Turkey. So let's say you go into that brawling, one-dimensional, stone thrower kind of style, right? Everybody fights that way. You know what that's going to do? You're going to singly handle, like you literally are going to eliminate all the smart IQ boxers. They're actually Latinos. The ones who don't have power, the ones who have a brain IQ, the ones who can think faster than the rest, who are just fucking stone throwers. You're going to eliminate them from the scene. Why? Because it's not going to be about IQ anymore. It's going to be about mental retardation. And nobody who's mentally capable is going to play the game of a mental retarded fighter who just wants to throw, the ones that want to learn anything. You are eliminating your talent. And I don't want United States to eliminate its talent. I appreciate my Angelos. I appreciate my Stephen Fultons. I appreciate my Devin Haney's. I appreciate my Deontay Wilders. I appreciate any fucking style. We are okay. But you are promoting, Tom against Tom. You're eliminating from your system the brightest boxers. Because in the end of the day, if you don't have the power, God didn't give you that power, what are you going to do? They made points in the National Boxing Association during those times because, on the Queensberry rules, because if you looked at the ancient boxing, right, they were going 46 rounds or 60 rounds to see who was getting knocked out first. There was no brain IQ with that. And there was a lot of brain damage, lots of it. You think any smart fighter is going to do that? It will end up being a disaster. And it's already a fucking disaster because these fighters were one dimensional, want to change the rules because they can't beat the smart IQ fighters. That's the problem. God gave them the power, maybe, but they didn't give them the IQ. And with that IQ in boxing, ooh, it's rough. If you're fighting a smart IQ boxer, you have to have an IQ. And you're going to have to develop and learn all the different styles of boxing so you can get better at what you're doing. But if you don't want to learn that and you just want to have one style, okay, no problem. Just don't change the rules. You want to be one dimensional and you're learning, no problem. But do not change the rules for the rest. But these casual fans, listen, they come and go. They're not real. They're not real boxing fans. Like I told you before, I met a lot of casual people in my life, and they don't give a shit if they watch Manny Pacquiao and Floyd, and they don't give a shit if they watch a hockey game. They don't give a shit. They'll give their opinion. They don't like it. I want to see this, but they were never going to see other fights. They're not going to incorporate or put money in the smaller fights because they don't give a shit. They're not putting the money on the Oscar Duarte versus Kenneth Sims, which I think is a great fight. Kenneth Sims underrated with his skills, and Oscar Duarte seems like he's, he has some power. We'll see. They're not putting money on those fights. They're only putting money on the Ryan Garcia fights or the Jake Paul fights. That's what they're doing. But they're not putting money on the small, on the real smaller venues where they're the good fights. I'm putting no money on that. The ones who are doing that are the ones who follow boxing more. So instead of worrying about casual stink at higher level fights, worrying developing the good small fights so we can see them. So Cepeda doesn't have to duck Edwin De Los Santos. Or we can fight Frank Martin before we see him against Shakur Steven to see if he has balls, because Edwin De Los Santos and fucking Edwin and Frank Martin, they're willing to take any fight. Rayo Valenzuela was willing to take any fight. But Cepeda doesn't, because he's fucking limited. Low IQ. He can't do it. So what are we going to do? Oh, everybody fights each other, but he can just move up the ranks? Terrible. No, they need to fight. Because if he loses, it's only going to show what we already knew. He was overrated. That's it. You know what? And I'll say one more thing before I end this, because I spoke to a lot of truths today. I spoke a lot of truths today. The irony of all this is that when Miguel Burchett lost, he was this guy, and then suddenly he dropped to nobody. Why? Remember what was his name? Leo Santa Cruz? He got knocked out by Gervonta Davis. He was here, and then he dropped all the way down. Why? Because even the ones who are nationalistic and racist, when their fighter from their country loses, they abandon him. They don't give a shit anymore. You lost, bye-bye. Who is the next one? Cepeda. Okay, if it's not Cepeda, who's the next one? Resendez. Okay, that's what they do. They have no loyalty. That's what casuals do, Mr. Turkey. That's what casuals do. But it's not about Tom and Jerry. It's about racism and nationalism. That's what sells a fight in the end of the day. And it's always been like that since the beginning of time for boxing. It's always been like that. And that's it. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on this topic. I hope I opened a few minds. I know that I mostly do transmissions in Spanish. People think I'm racist. I'm not racist, but to be honest with you, I don't want anybody to change the sport of boxing. I think that's terrible. Who the fuck are you to change the sport of boxing? Just because you want to see two flamethrowers, just because you think Lomachenko is the greatest shit you've ever seen, and then you discriminate since Muhammad Ali to all the great fighters to Lomachenko because he's a white fighter. Yeah, so let's just fucking skip everybody in the line who was before him just so we have a Ukrainian super fighter, bro. Just so we have this Ukrainian super fighter. He was okay. He was decent. He was a good fighter. Never undisputed. He was kind of ducked, just like other fighters too. But everything he fucking did was a robbery. He fought Siri Salido. Salido beat his ass. And he was crying. He fought fucking Teofimo. And I don't like Teofimo, but Teofimo's a duck. He lost against Teofimo Lopez. You robbed me. When he fought Jermaine Ortiz, that was a close fight. Oh, I won. Yeah, I won. Yeah, no robbery there, right? And then he fights Devin Haney, and Devin Haney beats him. And people, he robbed me. You fucking pussy. Because he couldn't beat the American style of boxing. And he apparently couldn't beat Salido's style of boxing either. But they put him up here. Even the ESPN, they took his fucking O off or whatever. I mean, gave him like literally an undefeated record. Like he didn't lose against Siri Salido. Siri Salido beat him. And they're always crying. Always crying. Why? Because you're trying to hype these fighters because they're white. That's the truth. Like Canelo's a hype fucking fighter too. Because he's white. But nobody will tell you that shit except for us in Golden Era. Because when you step in this fucking place, here we talk orthodox boxing, all that other bullshit goes out the window. And you discover the truth. And the truth sometimes is not nice, but it's necessary. The truth is necessary. So the question for you is, are you here because you like the sport of boxing? Or are you here to represent your race or represent your national identity? There's nothing wrong with representing your national identity or race. You can do that, but not over the sport of boxing, where you're literally just lying to yourself and making Vasil Lomachenko a top fighter in history when he went out the fucking back door, ducking Shakur Stevenson, ducking a rematch with Devin Haney, right? He wanted a rematch if he ducked him. Be real. And that's the problem. You're not real enough. But we are. That's Rios. What up? What up? Dice Mariano Valdez. Here, my bro. What up, Mariano? How you doing? Dice, totally agree. Fuck them. Yeah, absolutely. I love the way that Shakur shut up his mouth. Absolutely. You open Jesus' mind. I don't know if I did that or not, but definitely we're pro boxing fans here. So, don't let the sport change nationwide and worldwide. There's people who love boxing too, and they look at this shit and they're like pissed off. But you gotta learn your history, and that's important. All right, if y'all have any questions, y'all can ask any questions. If you got any questions, you can ask them here. You can put them on the chat, and I'll read them. So you can ask the question. I don't bite. I don't chew anybody out. I'm just speaking what I believe is true. And it's up to you to do your investigation and find out whether these things are true or not. That's what I always tell people. But I think the truth is much closer to what I'm saying than what you actually believe is true, because the media is lying to you, right? The media is lying to you. And that's terrible. I don't like the media. It's run by Latinos. It's not a good thing. Trying to put down Shakur Stevenson and Devin Haney. I mean, that's the fuck you think you are. Go back to do your shit somewhere else. All right. Well, with that said, we'll see you in the next video. Give us a like, subscribe, become part, and follow us on X as usual. And we'll see you in the next topic. Peace out. Into the next. Deuces. And I'll see you guys in the Spanish channel soon. All right. Later. Peace out.